Hello, beautiful people. Welcome back to the Hot Girls Learn Hockey podcast. My name is Sarah. If you're new here, this is the podcast where we talk about all things hockey, the what to knows, the who to knows, and everything in between. People, I fear that this episode might just break me physically, mentally, spiritually. Why do you ask? Well, I'm very glad that you asked because I will tell you. I have tried filming this episode not once, not twice, not even 3 times. This is my 6th time trying to film this episode. You'll understand why it was so difficult once I explain what it's about. Just know that every single time that I tried to film this episode, I went back and re-watched the footage. And I was like, Sarah, what are you talking about? That literally, this sentence did not make sense in it. You thought that it related to this sentence, but it didn't. Nothing was going right. Plus the audio was still janky. So I'm like, God, okay. And then I ended up going and buying a whiteboard to prove my points about certain things. And now the rankings on there are outdated. But you know what? 6 times the charm, I guess. So hi, welcome back to the podcast. Today we are talking all about the Stanley Cup. We're heading into Stanley Cup season. It's March as I'm filming this. Stanley Cup playoffs typically start in April. We're kind of gearing up towards, pretty much finding out who our top contenders for the 16 teams that are going to be in the playoffs are. And I thought no better time than now to kind of get this episode out. That way, if you guys decide to follow the Stanley Cup playoffs this season, then you can follow them and know what's going on. I'm going to do a little brief, emphasis on brief, history lesson. I know. I said there wasn't going to be history in this episode. I lied only a smidge, because there's going to be a little bit of history. I just feel like it can't be a Stanley Cup video without explaining what the Stanley Cup is and how it came about. So we're going to do that. And then I'm going to get into how teams are chosen for the playoffs. And then I'll get to how the playoffs actually work, how the games work for it. Because let me tell you, in my honest opinion, and I've also heard this from other people too, the Stanley Cup is probably one of the hardest championship trophies to win in sports. I'm not saying it's the hardest, but it is, after doing all the research and everything, it is very hard to win because, and I'll explain it later, but you have to win so many games and it feels like it's so physically taxing on your body. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's get into the episode. First things first, let's grab our drinks because boy, am I going to need it. I have a black cherry non-sponsored seltzer in here and I am going to chug it. Just kidding. I'm not going to chug it. I'm going to sip on it while I explain things to you. If I chug, I'll start burping. And burping does not sound good on a microphone. Also, it takes me a long time to cut out all my burps. So grab a drink, grab a snack maybe. If you're driving, don't do either unless that drink is water and you already have a snack in your side console, okay? But let's get into it. Cheers. Oh boy. Okay. So where to even begin? Let's just begin at the beginning, shall we? So it all kind of started with this man. His name is, or was, he's dead now, but Frederick Arthur Stanley, or also known as the Lord Stanley of Preston. He was a man, I'm not going to go into like his entire life story, but main things you need to know: he was a Canadian politician and an avid hockey fan. I'm talking, he loved it, his wife loved it, his sons, I think he had daughters too, like they all loved it. His sons were hockey players. They played in amateur leagues in Ottawa. Like they just loved hockey. This was a hockey family if there ever was one. He loved it so much that he had a trophy commissioned, like a physical trophy commissioned in 1892 to be awarded to the best amateur hockey or amateur skating club, I guess, in Canada. And so that leads us to the very first Stanley Cup. I'm putting that in quotation marks because that's not what it was called originally. It was awarded to the Montreal Hockey Club in 1893. Now, this first iteration of the championships is called the Dominion Hockey Challenge Cup. So that was the original name of the trophy. That was what the name that it was given when it was commissioned by Lord Stanley. And then obviously, it was renamed to be named after Lord Stanley, so it became the Stanley Cup instead of the Dominion Hockey Challenge Cup. And like I said, originally it was really just for the best amateur hockey / skating club in Canada. But then starting in 1909, then the cup has started to become contested by more professional teams or professional leagues. So all of the winners basically from 1893 to 1914 were determined by challenge games and league play. And it was a good mix of these amateur leagues and as well as the more pro teams, pro leagues at the time. And then by 1915, that was when the NHA, which is the National Hockey Association, and the PCHA, which is the Pacific Coast Hockey Association, these were the two main pro hockey associations at the time. They had decided that the way that the cup would be won from then on out would be that their respective champions would then face each other annually for the cup. And this kind of was the main deal up until 1926 when it was established that the cup would become the championship trophy for the NHL. I did want to make note in my Hot Girls Guide to the NHL episode, I feel that I kind of made it out to be that the NHL wasn't really a thing until the original six, which was in 1942, I believe was what I said, or 1945, something like that. The NHL did exist before that. I just decided to start with the original six because that's just a very crucial part to the NHL's history. But that was a misspeak on my half. It very much was a thing in the 20s, as stated by me literally right now, about the fact that in 1926 the Stanley Cup became the trophy for the NHL. So just wanted to clear that up. So yeah. And then now from then on out, it's just kind of been the trophy for the NHL for the best team in the league for that season up until present day. Our current title holders are the Florida Panthers. Shout out Matthew Tkachuk. I have to meet my quota, actually, of Matthew Tkachuk references in each episode. I don't know if you knew that, but I have to at least mention him once per episode. It's a quota entirely made up by me. Nobody's forcing me to do this, but I'm going to do it anyway. So that's pretty much a brief overview history of the cup itself and the championships and such. So now here's some little fun facts that I pulled out of my research. The Montreal Canadiens have won the Stanley Cup the most amount of times. They've won it 24 times. The Detroit Red Wings are the U.S. team that's won it the most. They've won it 11 times. And the very first U.S. team to ever win the Stanley Cup is a team that doesn't exist anymore. It was the Seattle Metropolitans in 1917. They were the first U.S. team to win the cup. There's only ever been 2 times in its entire history that the cup was not awarded because there was not a championship game played / there was not a season played. The first one was in 1919. It was because of the Spanish flu pandemic. Duh, it was a pandemic. They're not going to play hockey. They're all trying to not die. And the second time was in 2005 due to the NHL lockout, which is basically where there's a bunch of labor strikes, so they didn't have a season. For the 2004-2005 season, they didn't have a championship game. But it's very interesting that in its entire history, since 1893, this championship has been around. And only 2 times it hasn't been awarded, which is a very interesting fun fact that, I found. Some other fun things about the cup is that there's different kind of traditions for winning the cup. So I believe it was the Toronto Maple Leafs started the tradition of you pour champagne in the bowl, like the top bowl part of the cup, and each player has to drink champagne out of it, which baller. Love that. Oh my gosh. Another thing is taking a victory lap around the arena with it. I believe each player gets to do that. I think the captain and the alternate captains are probably the ones that go first. I've never actually watched a Stanley Cup championship game, but I just assume that they would bestow that honor first upon the captain that led them to this victory. But yeah, that is the rundown of the cup itself and the history behind the cup. Now here comes the part that I fear will just break me. I'm going to explain first how teams are chosen for the Stanley Cup playoffs, and then I will go into how the playoffs work. Okay, now how are we going to choose which teams are going to be competing for the Stanley Cup? First off, there are going to be 16 teams that will be battling it out on the ice for this glorious, glorious trophy. 8 of these 16 are going to be from the Western Conference, and the other 8 are going to be from the Eastern Conference. Now, you're probably wondering, Sarah, what is the Western and Eastern Conference? You didn't mention that in your Hot Girls Guide to the NHL episode. And you're totally right. I dropped the ball on that one. I'm sorry, guys. I mentioned the divisions that we have, the Central, the Pacific, the Atlantic, and the Metropolitan, but I didn't mention what conferences they're from. And apologies on that. So let me explain to you. We have the 4 divisions, like I mentioned before, but they are split up into 2 conferences. We have the Western Conference, and that is going to have the Central Division and the Pacific Division. And we have the Eastern Conference, which has the Atlantic Division and the Metropolitan Division. Now, to help things out with explaining everything, I did make a whiteboard. I made it the last time that I tried to film this episode. So the points that are on this whiteboard are not current points for these teams. That's not their current rankings as far as I know. So instead of just updating it, I just left it as is, because this is all going to be a hypothetical situation while I'm explaining to you how the playoffs work. So for my audio listeners, I'm so sorry. I'll try my best to explain what I'm pointing to on the whiteboard, and then for my video watchers and listeners, take a gander at my beautiful work. Ta-da! I made it all cutesy and color-coded. I love it. I'll hold it closer to the camera, that way you can see it. Did you see it? Isn't it cute? Oh, I love it. All right, so like I mentioned, these are not the current rankings for the division or conferences. These are, oh god, what day did I write these? I'm pretty sure I wrote these on March 6th or 7th, and today is the 12th as I'm filming this. So obviously not up to date. There's been lots of games played since then. But for this situation, I feel that it'll work. Now, I mentioned that there's going to be 16 teams playing. Well, 12 of these teams are going to be the top 3 in each division. So in this hypothetical, from the Central, we have the Winnipeg Jets, the Dallas Stars, and the Minnesota Wild going to the playoffs. From the Pacific, we have the Golden Knights. Oh, I just noticed some of my whiteboards wiped off. Aw. Anyway, from the Pacific, we have the Vegas Golden Knights, the Edmonton Oilers, and the LA Kings going to the playoffs. From the Atlantic Division, we have the Florida Panthers, the Toronto Maple Leafs, and the Tampa Bay Lightning going to the playoffs. And from the Metropolitan Division, we have the Washington Capitals, the Carolina Hurricanes, and the New Jersey Devils going to the playoffs. These make up 12 of the 16 teams. Now that leaves us 4 spots open. So the 4 teams are filled by the next 2 highest place finishers in each conference. What this means is we're getting out of division rankings. Now we're going to conference rankings, which are different things, because a team can be high ranking in their division, does not always mean they're going to be high ranking in their conference. So in this situation, it would just be the next 2 highest ranking teams after the ones that have already been chosen, from the 12. Does that make sense? And that will make up the 16 teams that are going to be competing for the playoffs. Now, how do these playoffs work? Well, let me explain. Sorry if there's an abrupt audio change / if the camera angle looks different. I forgot that my notes for this part of the episode were on my iPad and not my notebook. And I, for some reason, didn't bring my iPad up here. But now I have it. So now let's go over how the playoffs work. So the way that the championships are going to work is that it is 4 rounds, and each round is a best of 7 series. The first round is what's called the conference quarterfinals. It's, 16 teams, 8 in each conference. That's the very beginning. Then the second round is going to be the conference semifinals, which is 8 teams. So we whittled it down to 4 in each conference. Then the third round is going to be the conference finals, which is 4 teams, 2 in each conference. We're really narrowing it down now. And all that leads to the very last and the 4th round, the Stanley Cup finals. 2 teams, 1 from each conference. So I mentioned that each round is going to be a best of 7 series games between each of the teams that are competing against each other. But what does that mean exactly? What this means is basically it's the first team to win 4 games advances to the next round. How this would work, let's say in this hypothetical. Sorry, I'm grabbing my whiteboard again because I forgot what the rankings were in this hypothetical situation. Okay, let's say first we got let's just say the Dallas Stars and the Toronto Maple Leafs. So they're competing in this first round of the Stanley Cup playoffs. Now, let's say Dallas wins the first game, they win the second game, and they win the third game. Now, if they won the 4th game, then Maple Leafs are out of the playoffs, and then Dallas will go to the next round. But let's now say that the Maple Leafs, they won this 4th game. That means that now they will play up until one of them wins 4 games. So the first 4 are always guaranteed because obviously you have to play up until somebody wins 4. So those 4 games are going to be, locked in. We know that there's going to be 4. It's games 5, 6, and 7 that are, maybe they'll happen, maybe they won't. Another difference between the Stanley Cup playoffs as opposed to, let's say the Super Bowl. Super Bowl is played on a non-biased team's field, like a third-party field pretty much. It's not played on either team's home field just to not give them an advantage. There's not that in the Stanley Cup. There's actually a thing called the home ice advantage. So in the first 3 rounds, the higher seeded team has home ice advantage. But in the 4th round, so the Stanley Cup finals, it goes to the team with the better regular season record. So they're playing in their own arenas, these teams. It's just, they trade off and stuff. So the format of the series is going to be that the home ice advantage team hosts games 1, 2, 5, and 7, while their opponent hosts games 3, 4, and 6. Another thing with these Stanley Cup playoff games is that in a normal NHL game during the regular season, if a game goes into overtime, it's going to be a extra 5 minutes on top, at the very end of the game, and it's sudden death, so whichever team scores wins, the whole shebang. In Stanley Cup playoffs, it is instead another full 20 minutes, so pretty much a whole other period, which is going to be 5-on-5, sudden death overtime until somebody scores a goal. It's kind of like the 4 Nations tournament, where in the very in the championships in the very last game, the USA and Canada went into overtime, so they had an extra 20 minutes, and then Connor McDavid made a goal. We all know what happened there. But yeah, so there's no shootouts in the Stanley Cup playoffs. It is going to be overtime. Yeah, got it. And if you got what a shootout is, it pretty much just means that one player from each team will go up against the opposing team's goalie. It's going to be 1-on-1. It's going to be the shooter and the goalie, and they're going to try to shoot. They get one shot, one chance, one opportunity to seize everything they ever wanted in one moment. Sorry, I had to take that opportunity. But they get just one shot to make it into the goal, and they pretty much just go until somebody makes it. But they'll do that after overtime in the normal NHL game. No, but not in Stanley Cup, because there's no shootouts in Stanley Cup. Like I mentioned, there's only overtime. And above all, once it gets down to those final two teams in the last fourth round, whoever wins the whole shebang. They get to hoist that big hunk of metal in the air and skate around on some other pieces of metal on their feet. I'm very excited. This is the first season that I've actually followed and, kept up with the rankings and the teams and such. And this is going to be the first, like I mentioned, the first Stanley Cup playoffs that I'm going to be watching. So I'm very excited to see how everything's going to turn out. I've been asked actually by a bunch of people in my real life to which team I think is going to win. So I didn't say anything then. I'm not going to say anything now because I really am keeping my opinions to myself. But I think we're gearing up, especially after these recent trades. We're gearing up for a very interesting playoff season. All right. I feel that I've yapped enough for one day. I so hope that these explanations make sense to you. I've mentioned, this is like the fourth time I mentioned it. I've filmed this so many times because each time I was like rewatching and I'm like, that doesn't make sense. That does not make sense. So again, I really, really, really hope this makes sense to you. If it doesn't, please let me know and I can clarify with anything the best I can. Don't have next week's episode planned yet. I have a couple of ideas teetering in my head. I do want to take a little bit of a break from history videos because, man, as much as I do love them, they are a lot to research. What I kind of want to do is something that I mentioned in my last episode. If you watch that, then you'll probably have a good guess. But yeah, thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you learned something today. And if you're watching this on YouTube, please make sure to like, subscribe, and comment. If you're listening to this on Spotify, please make sure to give the show a good rating. And I love you guys so much. Thank you so much for watching or listening. This has been the Hot Girls Learn Hockey podcast. My name is Sarah, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!